would you like to overcome fear and perfectionism? Martine Cohen will tell us how. And what's so special about Martine is she is an author, speaker, and transformative coach dedicated to empowering individuals to lead themselves authentically, separate their identity from their emotions and thoughts, and make choices from a place of deep inner awareness and alignment. So, Martine, tell us about what blocks people when it comes to their fear and perfectionism, and how can they overcome it? Heal Podcast with Lily Patrascu shares longevity and anti-aging techniques to stay young forever, increase energy, overcome addiction, and live your longest, best life ever, shared by world's most innovative, alternative, and traditional health thought leaders, healers, and doctors. Discover quantum healing strategies to heal your mind, body, and soul.
So first of all, thank you so much for having me today, and it's a pleasure to be here. So in reality, it's fear itself that is the biggest blocker, but it's not what we fear. It's actually the feeling of fear. So we actually fear feeling fear. So we will do anything to avoid that feeling, which means we'll either make ourselves smaller than we are, or we're going to go chase something. But rarely do we do something out of alignment where we stop, we check in with ourselves and start questioning that fear rather than trying to avoid it, run away from it.
Thank you. How can someone have that balance between the fear that is actually meant to protect you and the fear that is actually blocking you from achieving your full potential?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So fear is always a messenger. It's not something that means anything. We don't have to have a story around it. For me, if I feel fear, I'm going to stop, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to start having a conversation with it. And the first thing that I'm going to ask is, why are you here? What's your message? So if it's something that we have to watch out for, so for example, if it's a real fear where we're going to go, somewhere where it's a war zone or somewhere where, it's in the middle of, I don't know, the jungle, but we don't have the right tools. So we can feel fear about something that is real or real danger. That's number one. And that's okay because it lets us know where we're at and what our nervous system is actually interpreting at the situation that's before us. The second question would be, even in that case, would be, okay, so I want to understand a little bit more. So this fear is about my perception of a dangerous situation. So then I'm going to start questioning and saying, okay, so do I agree with this fear? Do I agree with it? Because most of the time with my clients, they do not agree with their fears, but they have never just stopped to question them. Instead, they're kind of like submissive to their fear. And if they feel fear, they have to deal with the feeling, then they have to deal with the actual thing that scares them. And most of the time, we'll just walk away from something that we fear because we don't want to feel that feeling. That's very discomforting. Then the question is, well, but for this fear, in other words, if this feeling of fear had not overcome me, or if I wasn't feeling anything right now, or if I could choose my next feeling, is this what I would choose? And if the answer is no, then the next question is, well, what would I choose instead? And that's the answer to that would be what you're actually aligned with.
Thank you. How does perfectionism and fear, how do they work together in order to actually block you from achieving your goals? Because what I find is that I'm a perfectionist, okay? And sometimes I find that I might not take certain actions because I just fear that it won't be perfect by the end of it.
Yeah, so I'm also a recovering perfectionist. It's also in my book. And I think by the way, a lot of high achievers are actually perfectionists. So it's not a bad thing. It just depends how you channel it, right? The problem with perfectionism is that you're so afraid to fail, right? That sometimes you hold yourself back from success because I need to know one more thing and I need to be 100% sure and I need to make sure I do this exactly the right way. And so we can prevent flow, we can prevent creativity. If we're too perfectionist, we're much harder on ourselves, we're our biggest critic. And then instead of being able to sort of get out there sometime and take calculated positive risks, we kind of hold back. So a perfectionist could have a fear of failure, could also have a fear of success, right? But the idea is perfectionism is simply sort of one embodiment of fear. There are a whole bunch of them, which I call in my book layers. There are things that drive us instead of us driving ourselves. These are the things that are become, in our driver's seat, and that kind of take over without our permission. But perfectionism is very much fear-based. And it's sort of, I need to be perfect. In my case, it was, I need to be perfect just to be acceptable, for example, when I was much younger. So I embodied that. I sort of absorbed that. And then one point when I was an adult, I was like, but no, I don't agree with that. I have a right to make mistakes. I have a right to learn. I have a right to just be who I am. And so that questioning and that sort of discovery and kind of exploration of myself, I started realizing I don't agree with some of the belief systems that are in me. So then I'm going to have a dialogue around that in a conversation. And once you work through things and you realize you don't agree, they kind of just fall for the wayside. They dissipate on their own. That's the beauty of it.
Thank you. How do you feel over performance? Like, for example, Beyonce or Taylor Swift, people that organize events of 100,000 people. And yes, I understand that there's actually an army of people that tend to organize those kind of things for them. But I do think that they get involved, and there's a lot of pressure to perform for 100,000 people or 80,000 people. And I'm wondering, how does a high performer, how do they manage that fear and perfectionism so that they do perform really well at times when it's critical that they perform well and they don't actually fail? Because, for example, I organize events of 300, 600 people. And what I find is that even with such a relatively small crowd, the pressure of that is so big that I tend to get a lot of sore throat and migraine and cough in advance of the event happening. It's almost like my body is self-sabotaging, and I don't get enough sleep and I don't rest. And then the day of the actual event, it's almost like, a lot of times it feels almost like I'm putting on a show, almost like a theater show, and the actor is not prepared, And I'm wondering, what can someone do to make sure that when it comes to having those moments where you have to perform, where it's like a huge crowd, everyone is watching, and in some cases it's millions of people watching, and for most of us it's like a much smaller number, but it still feels so daunting. What can someone do to make sure that they overcome that fear and perfectionism?
So there are a number of things in what you're saying. And first of all, that perfectionism is much more daunting and much more energy consuming than anything else than actually carrying out what it is that we need to do. So we need to keep that in mind, right? It's about, rather than moving away from the fear, when we feel that fear, and that sounds very familiar to me, what you're talking about, is to lean into it a little bit more. And just say, okay, whoa, hold on a second. As if it was a younger version of yourself or a little child, and saying, okay, what are you really afraid of? I'm afraid I'm not ready. I'm afraid I'm thinking of everything that could go wrong, right? But an antidote to that is, well, am I prepared? What about if I thought of everything that could go right? In other words, a lot of the times we just let our mind go astray and start having these crazy thoughts, and then they snowball, right? They're clusters, basically. Thoughts come in clusters. And when we buy into the thought of fear and everything that could go wrong, we keep going and going and going. And all of a sudden, it seems that this huge thing, the only way for your body or your nervous system to reset is actually to self-sabotage, to pause. And the only way it knows how is to actually self-sabotage you in that moment, because otherwise you wouldn't hear it. So understanding that our body is just trying to help itself and trying to perform as well as possible. But when we put the added stress and pressure, not of the work itself, but it's the story around it. What if I fail? What if I don't do perfectly? Well, what if I don't fail? What if it works out the way it's supposed to? Do I trust myself that I have the ability, that I have the experience, that I've done, I have everything on my list and nothing fell through the cracks? If we move away from the feeling of fear and into A, practicality, B, sort of just self-trust, and reestablishing that line of communication, because we rarely check in with ourselves. We have a lot of thoughts all day long, and they're the ways we converse with ourselves, but we don't really talk to ourselves with that sort of understanding, compassion, and partnership. Like, can I partner with me to trust that I will do the best that I can in the situation, and whatever goes wrong, I have the tools to fix it as it happens, because a lot of things are out of our control. And there's a power failure, the generator's busted at the same time as the dress or something in the seam sort of comes unraveled when Beyonce's in the middle of her show, whatever it is. These things will happen. The question is, when they do, and they're nobody's fault necessarily, how do I show up to them? And what's a story that my brain tells me? Does it say, see, here you go again? Remember, right? You shouldn't be doing this. You don't have the capacity. You don't have the ability. Or is it going to say, wait, whoa, I got the resolve. I know what to do here. I'm creative. I can think outside the box. I can find solutions. Because by the way, that's when we feel most empowered, not when everything goes right, but when we know how to deal with whatever is not going right. So we have to remember and anchor ourselves in our own power.
Thank you. How does someone like a peak performer get into the zone so they can overcome their fear and perfectionism when it comes to performing at a really high level, like we talked about already? Maybe also like an entrepreneur, let's say an entrepreneur, an athlete, they have like a big presentation, and how do they not allow that fear and the fear of failure to kind of like dominate, aside from what you mentioned? Is there any technique or habit or routine they can get into so that they in flow when they have to perform?
Yeah, so for different people, there are different things that work. For many of my clients, is actually we do some form of visualization. It can be a meditation or visualization of something where actually they feel fully in control of themselves, not of any situation. That gives them like their Zen space and their Zen place in their mind, where it quietens their mind, gives them space to just expand and really feel themselves in their power. And then before they go on stage or before they go for that race or whatever it is, they will do that visualization. So where it's either recorded in advance or whatever it is, and they play it in their mind to the point where they're almost in a zone before they begin. And then once you're out there, you have a very clear goal. I do a lot of this with my clients, which is set an intention for that moment or set an intention from the day. Because when you set an intention, you are programming your brain to look at everything through that prism, through that lens. So that, for example, if you have a big performance or a Broadway actor or whatever it is, so you get, okay, what do you want to accomplish this time? And even though they do it every day and sometimes they have 2 performances a day, it doesn't matter. Something might shift in them. It helps them connect to themselves. It gives them trust. It gives them a goal, which means it also gives them a direction. And rather than just sort of like going out there, whatever happens, happens, they already feel anchored in that. And they've had that little conversation with themselves before they go out there. And it can be 5 minutes or 15 minutes or half an hour, whatever they need. But it can be really, really short. And it's kind of like that boost where you give yourself that big hug and you're like, okay, 3, 2, 1, I've got this. I'm ready to go. And it works really well because, by the way, fear is never in the present moment. It's something that we're recalling from the past, but it's really about the future. So whenever we feel fear, we need to know that it's an anticipation for something. It's not in the moment, because in the moment, if something goes wrong, you're not feeling fear. And the other thing on the side that I teach my clients is not to fear fear, to just understand it's a message like any other message. And you can choose to answer that call, or you can choose to say, no, I'm good here. I don't need fear. Like, do I need fear in this moment? I'm about to go out on stage. Do I need fear? No. What do I need instead? I need energy. I need excitement. I want to get the 100,000 people in the concert, going. And I want every one of them to come out there feeling like they just had an experience. When you focus on what you're about to bring, you forget that you're afraid. And that works really well.
How can entrepreneurs stop self-sabotaging in terms of like falling ill in advance of the event happening? Is there any practice or routine they can do so they can prevent themselves actually getting ill simply by focusing so much on what could possibly go wrong and the potential failure and the potential criticism and looking bad and the shame and the guilt of having delivered poor event or poor delivery of that presentation?
Yeah. So it's really all about heightened awareness. And the first question that I would ask is, what is your why? What is it about this presentation that makes you want to do it? How did you come about choosing this? And it's never a why question, because why leads to criticism and leads to blame and leads to judgment. It's a what, because what is a much more open kind of ended a question that you can respond to, and your mind gets curious and interested, and it gives you a lot of information about yourself. What is it that's making you want to say yes in the first place? Because most of the time, or a lot of the time, when it's self-sabotage, there is something within you that part of you is not aligned with what you're about to do, either because it's too much in one shot, either because that perfectionism is kicking in and making you work much harder than you need to, right? And we're giving into that. but there is usually something that is misaligned. And if we deal with the misalignment, that goes away. There's no more self-sabotage. Not everybody self-sabotages before they have something huge. So we need to understand, what is it about the situation that is making my body pause? And am I actually listening to my body throughout this process? Or am I just ignoring every single one of my needs because I have that goal that I want to fill?
Thank you. How can entrepreneurs eliminate guilt and shame, the guilt and the shame they might feel in advance of an event or something that they need to deliver, because they are focusing on their fear and their perfectionism?
Yeah. So first of all, guilt and shame, I know we couple them together. They're really very different. Guilt is usually sort of based on a specific event or something that we didn't do and should have done, or think that we should have done or could have done. And shame is really existential. It's a way of being. It's a way of showing up to the world, and it's a whole belief system around who we are. So they're very, very different. Shame is not something that you're going to feel before an event. Shame is something that it's a really heavy burden that people just carry with them, and it expresses itself in different ways and at different times. Guilt is a one-shot deal that can repeat itself over and over again, but it really has a very short lifespan, thankfully. But guilt is not always bad. Sometimes guilt reminds us, oh, I need to try harder in something, or I want to be a better person in this area. When you say guilt before an event, what do you have in mind?
I'm actually thinking more like, in advance of organizing the event, you're thinking about the fear of doing it, and because you want it to be perfect. And then what happens, for example, post-event, I would say that for most events that I've organized, even when the event was absolutely fabulous and everyone had a great time, I'm almost like always watching out for at least like one person to say, oh, this thing went wrong, or you forgot this, or, and it's almost like I'm waiting for the shoe to drop, for someone to like say, oh, I didn't like this. And sometimes that thing doesn't come, but I still feel like this drop in energy and in emotion. And I feel bad that I didn't do better. And I mean, like, I feel that every time, like the shame and the guilt of maybe not having done an even better event, even if nobody complained. But if somebody did complain, then I feel even worse.
Then, yeah, because then it confirms it.
Yeah.
Right.
So how does someone overcome the shame and the guilt from, let's say, not having accomplished the perfect image they would have had of whatever delivery they wanted to accomplish that day?
Yeah, so that kind of shame and guilt is directly linked to needing a lot of control over everything, right? But understanding that the only thing that we can control is ourselves. We cannot control circumstances. If you're in the middle of an event and the roof caves in, God forbid, for example, or something like that, I mean, that's not something that anybody can anticipate or do. The question would be then, what have you done once that happened? Because that will instruct whether you did an amazing job. And in reality, when we need control, we sort of have to turn off the creative juices inside of us. So it's control or creativity. Creativity has creation, right? And it's co-creating with the universe. And it means that we can actually create a beautiful event. If we are so gung-ho on controlling, then we're trying to control the outcome of the event. We're not going to be thinking about it the same way. So I would actually invite you and your listeners that the next time that there is an event or anything that they're doing, or even if it's a business decision or whatever it is, to say, do I need to control the outcome, or do I want to create an outcome? And it feels, even when you say it in your body, one feels constricting and really harsh, and the other one is like open and flowy and gives you a realm of possibilities. And when you program your brain to go into creative mode rather than control mode, you have much more wherewithal and many more tools to be able to then create an outcome. And at the end, you're going to say, that was good enough. And good enough is really good enough, because then your body will not self-sabotage. It won't rebel against you in some way that really, sort of cuts you off at your knees at the last moment. And you won't feel fear, because fear is fear of the unknown. It's fear of, oh my goodness, the expectations are so ridiculously high that I'm afraid I can't meet them. But then if you stop and pause, oh, they're my expectations. Well, then why do I have those in the first place about myself, as opposed to expectations that I can meet, that will feel good, and where if other people feel good and I feel good, my body will want to do more and it will not self-sabotage me. And that's really important, because if we prepare so hard and work so hard to get somewhere, but then we have self-sabotage, that means that all the efforts were for nothing. And something we need to remember, it's not always the right route to go. It's the biggest one, the one which the root of most struggle, and struggle can turn into suffering because guilt and shame can lead to suffering, right? Like on a long-term basis. So the idea is to say, what is the best route to get me to where I want to go? Not the one of most struggle, the one with most ease.
Thank you. So focusing on creativity and not control, tell me, how would that make a difference in terms of like the outcome, in terms of like how I would feel at the end of the event? Because for me, I don't think I've ever thought, oh, this is good enough. I have never felt that. I've never thought, oh, this is, I mean, I have, like, in the world, I've never, like, anything I've ever done, you know, like whether it was a test or whether it was like a anything, I never thought, oh yeah, that was good enough. Never in my life have I thought that. So how does
Yes. It's
how
so
does
familiar to me.
yeah.
Yes. I understand, as a fellow perfectionist or recovering perfectionist, whatever you want to call it. Same. I completely relate to what you're saying. The idea of saying it's good enough is a moment of acknowledgement for all that you have accomplished. It doesn't mean it's the end goal. It's not the finish line, but it's still a notch on the journey. And the reason it's important to do that is because otherwise, again, the body will rebel. We have a relationship with ourselves, and we react to it in a similar way that we react to other people. The only difference is it turns inward, which means self-criticism, self-sabotage, right? As opposed to doing it to somebody else, right? Where somebody will be criticizing. We criticize ourselves, which is much more painful, because you cannot walk away from you. You can walk away from every other person, but you can't walk away from yourself. And you believe yourself. So that's very painful. So saying that this is good enough, and now I also know how to make it even better for next time. That actually anchors you in a place where you trust yourself, and you know that every time you do something, next time you've learned from this. This was great with what you knew, and now you know even more. So there's an excitement as opposed to a fear where, oh, now I could do it this way, or I could do it that way, or I saw the audience at one point, they got fidgety, so we'll put a little break in between, or we'll add a little station, or we'll add something else, or, we'll have 2 photo booths so people don't have to wait in line. But the idea is to be grateful for what you thought of in terms of what you came up with, and say, wow, this was a good beginning. This was good enough. Now, next time, I know what to do even better. Because we also have to give ourselves some grace and understanding that the first time you do an event, or a certain kind of event, is really the first time. So if your expectation is, I don't know anything and everything here is new, then whatever you accomplish, you're going to feel good about. And that good feeling is going to actually snowball into you wanting to do better. Wanting, not fearing failure, but actually embracing success. There's a big difference in the body between the two.
Thank you. I find that, for example, for me, the most important thing is I don't want people to be like going to my event and thinking that I didn't care, and that's why I didn't do this or I didn't do that. The reality is, when you're organizing an event with hundreds of people or thousands of people, it is impossible for me to be like, there's not 100 lilies. And what I find as well is that there's not 100 lilies literally, in the sense that there's nobody that cares about them as much as me. And I haven't found a way to train people in a way that they would have that kind of like incentive and that like initiative to be like, okay, if someone doesn't have a chair, let me be helpful. Let me see what people need and this kind of thing. And it's probably just something that I need to learn more about in terms of like leadership and empowering and inspiring people. And but it's for that reason that I feel very much powerless and unsupported when I'm doing an event, even when I do manage to, get some people to help me. And I guess that's one of my biggest fears, doing something that is not in line with what experience I want them to have. But I guess, like you said, it's all about learning to do it better and better every time, and you learn from every experience. And I do find that I do learn from every experience. Tell me about, how did you learn to overcome your own fear and your own perfectionism, and what breakthroughs did you have in the process?
So for me, my experience was actually quite unique. I was a perfectionist, and I don't even know if I knew that I was a perfectionist fully. So that's like the worst part, right, where your brain hides it from you. But 8.5, 9 years ago, I had a very serious concussion. There was a car that rammed into me, and I lost the use of my brain for quite a while. And while I was recovering, I had a lot of fear because I didn't feel like myself. I couldn't have this kind of conversation with you. I really couldn't sort of interact with the world. And that was the scariest thing for me because I felt like I was losing myself in who I was. Our brain is like such a huge part of who we are. What I didn't realize is that I had become sort of like identified with my brain, right? I kind of felt like my brain was me and I was my brain, whereas it's not the case, but that's how I felt. And so having a very quiet mind for a while allowed me to go within because I was so terrified and everything seemed so dark and hopeless that I didn't know what to do. And I had some sort of like instinct or intuition to just go within. And when I went inside, I realized all these fears that we have and all these limiting beliefs and identities around who we are and who we should be and what we're supposed to do and not do. And I didn't agree with them all. And so I started working through that. I call it like our inner landscape. And I realized all these things that I thought I had already dealt with, or these things that were left over from childhood, or just these fears that we bring along and they kind of like, sort of have a grip on you. But the blessing for me, and I call it like sort of like the blessing of a dysfunctional brain, was that I didn't have a story around it. There was no judgment. I just saw these things. I could feel the intensity of the fear. I could work through it, let it, run through me and leave and dissipate, because my brain wasn't there to tell me, oh my goodness, you can't do that. You can't feel this. You can't think that. That's scary. Don't go there. Don't do that. It just was. And so I don't recommend a concussion for anybody, but the reality is that my book actually walks the reader to go through their own journey of discovery and working through their fears and into self-leadership, because before we can lead others, we need to lead ourselves. And then we can lead others into sort of inspiration and to become better versions of themselves. And then you will get the support that you need because you deserve that. But the idea was to understand that our brain is so, set on protecting us. And especially today in 2025, when there's so many distractions and so much coming at it and so much social media and social platforms that overwhelm the brain on an ongoing basis. We have to filter so many things a day, much more than what our brain is actually meant to be able to filter, that it's overwhelmed constantly and consistently. So it's going to bring up fears about everything and nothing as if they were catastrophic and sort of like, life endangering, but they feel that way. So the idea is to just start questioning the fears, leaning into them, and really rechanneling your thoughts into things that are more positive, more helpful, more constructive, more creative, because that's how we regain our power. So it's not that there's anything wrong with fear, but we fear fear. I didn't fear anything, and I had no judgment around it because my brain was dysfunctional. And that's when I realized I'm not my brain. I'm so much more. We're not our brains. We are so much more. And so the work that I do is really to bring that to the world through my book, through my workshops, through speaking engagements, and inspire each other. Because when you're afraid, you're not inspired. When you're afraid, you have to make yourself smaller. And smaller means you have less tools and less of you. And then that fear snowballs into, see, I can't do it. But that's because I wasn't all of me in that event. Because I made myself smaller, because when we fear, we cower. We go within and we find it much harder to interact with the world. When we come from a place of courage and creativity and questioning, we're much more open. And then we can actually deal with a lot more than we imagine. We have much more power than we think.
Thank you. Tell us about No More Layers, your book. What's the main message behind this book?
The main message is that it's all about self-leadership. And once you learn who you are and you understand how you function, it teaches you how to work with your thoughts. It teaches you how to reframe it and redirect them. It teaches you about alignment. It teaches you about making choices versus decisions. They're very different. And then it teaches how to lead others. So there are chapters on relationships because we mirror each other. There's a chapter on, boss versus leader. You don't want to be a boss. You want to be a leader, because that's really when you can lead your team, and that's when you can get the best out of your team. There's a section all about relationship to self, because we're born with a relationship to ourselves, but it's the one that we nurture the least and neglect the most. And yet, we have thoughts all day long. Those are quiet conversations that we have with ourselves. Our thoughts are words, right? Do we agree with our thoughts? Do we like the kind of thoughts we have? Do we like the relationship we have with ourselves? Through client stories, through exercises, through inspiration and aha moments, and all sorts of even science-based connections, I really will walk the reader through understanding their brain much better, understanding their inner functioning, choosing what kind of relationship they want to have with themselves, what kind of leader they want to be, first and foremost, in terms of themselves, and owning themselves fully, and then going out into the world and really accomplishing what it is that they want. So, by the way, it just won gold and silver at the International Business Awards for a self-leadership book. So it's being recognized as such, which was fantastic. And I'm very grateful for that, because it gets it into the hands of more readers. And that's really my goal here. It's to help people realize their full potential, realize who they are, and break free from any chains and internal fears that they have, so they can step into the world in the way that, they'll look in the mirror and say, yes, this is me. And I fully own that.
Thank you. Tell us where entrepreneurs can connect with you and grab a hold of your book.
Right. So it's on Amazon. It's called No More Layers, because layers are things that, prevent you from being fully yourself. Discover your inner power and reclaim true freedom from the inside out. It's available on all the Amazon platforms. They can also reach out to me at martinecohen.com. I have what I call an open door policy, which means I am not a team member or, a bot. Actually, I respond to every email. It might take a bit of time, but I do, because for me, it's about being in touch and staying connected with the audience. I also do have a little giveaway for people who want to reframe their thoughts and sort of get that quiet, so they have some space and they can work through their fears. So it's www.martinecohen.com/connect with me. And that's a gift to you and your audience.
Thank you. Follow me for more interviews with world's most innovative health change makers to live your healthiest life ever.